Hey guys, so welcome back. We have an update on the SJM case again. The police have met. They have set up their accidental death committee, and again, we're going to make sure that they did not go in with pencils, because if they went in with pencils, that is super sus. Check out the last video if you want to know why. Erasing things. And so they decided to extend the investigation, but they're going to devote fewer resources. So they said that they're not exactly sure if they're going to put different teams or if they're going to have more people, but they're definitely going to reduce the number of staff. So they were kind of vague, right? It kind of sounds like the way that the defense team for Mr. A has been responding. Like, there's an expression in Korean where the front doesn't match the back, like when you say something and then it contradicts itself in the end. So they're saying that they're not sure exactly if they're going to add more people, but they're definitely going to reduce the number of people. Okay, so in any event, we did get indications from SJM's father that he's not a fan of the committee, and he really wants a special unit that is going to investigate Mr. A and his claims. Now, what the police said is that the claims that were filed by SJM's father last week, the criminal charges, one for abuse and the other for abandonment that led to death of his son, will be discussed by the committee. So they said that they wanted to do it all at once. Not only that, they said that in order to maintain fairness, the police commissioner is going to be head of this committee, and that they're going to make sure that his petition, his filing of the criminal charges, is going to be considered in relation to all of the things that are on the agenda in terms of their analysis. I wouldn't believe that. I would believe it exactly with this pencil, that they're trying to probably just diluting his request in a sea of other discussion points where it'll just get lost and it'll probably just be weakened and it'll probably just turn into just, like weak Kool-Aid where basically like it has no flavor or taste anymore. What we can probably hope for essentially is that SJM's father really pushes for this case to go to the prosecution, and that the prosecution has some sort of political will to take up the case and really reinvestigate it aggressively. Now, we also had a very interesting clarification that was on my mind, and again, this case has really been very elucidating when it comes to the Korean language, because not only has there been a lot of doublespeak, there's been a lot of language that's used by young people that we're trying to parse out, but there has been this phrase that was used by Mr. A when he was describing what happened that night. And remember when he was saying that the only thing he remembered was when SJM had supposedly ran, tripped, fell over some sort of embankment, and that he had to drag him back up and that it was very difficult. But the word he used in Korean when he referred to his friend SJM in terms of dragging him back up, he did not use the word him. He did not use the word SJM. He did not use the word his friend. He used the word that. So in Korean it was 그거. And so I thought like, oh, well, maybe this is some sort of expression that, I'm not that familiar with, because there is somewhat of a similar sounding expression that is a term of endearment in Korean. That's 그대. So I was like, well, 그거 sounds like really rude, like, that thing. And I was like, well, maybe there's another, form or usage of that term that really means like something that's not so rude. And, maybe I need to learn that. But apparently that wasn't it at all. And that people were just at that time, I guess, just letting that go because there was more important things to focus on. Now that we're going over the more nuances and the specifics of this case, it is really glaringly weird that Mr. A would have referred to his friend as like, yeah, it was really hard, like, dragging that thing back up the riverbank. So SJM's father has said specifically now to the media that phrase really hurts his feelings, that his son's so-called friend would refer to his own son as that thing that he had to drag up. So he also then made the point that, well, does this mean that he was referring to my son in that manner because he was a dead body at that point? Like, what did you really mean, Mr. A? And this is why he says that we really need to have more of an investigation, particularly focused on the actions of Mr. A, particularly during the hours between 3:30 to 4:30. And I say hours. Well, I say hours because it seems like there's so many stories between that time period that it seems like there's so many versions of what happened between 3:30 to 4:30. So let's pick one, okay? Let's try to settle on one that's the truth. And that would take an investigation. So we also have now CCTV footage. This is some sassy CCTV footage, and I know some of you come here for the sass, but this is not even sass that I'm bringing sass. This is sass from another sass, and I'll put some of my own sass on top of this sass. So this CCTV footage is from, when, Hot Daddy's show on SBS, and how there's been a lot of criticism about how slanted that show was, how misleading that show was. Well, they actually went on site to the real tunnel, and they were reenacting that scene of Mr. A leaving the park at 4:32 a.m. And you know how like that was after the time when he supposedly woke up, and he was woken up by witness number 6, who now looks shady. And supposedly witness number 6 had woken him up at around 4:27 a.m. Then he walked around all shady, like in this kind of like circuitous path, same circuitous path that the Burberry lady took. And he walked through that tunnel, right? So we know that very famous shot of him walking through the tunnel. But when they did the reenactment, as you'll see, the director made the actor go many times, do many takes and look super drunk, way too drunk, like drunk to the point where like it would support a theory that he was still blacked out. Okay, so you can see the difference between the show version of the staggering drunk versus the walk that Mr. A actually took. And if you refer to the other video that I posted about the differences in the way that people walk when they're drunk, when they're exhausted, and when they're wet, it looked like the real Mr. A was more exhausted rather than drunk, if you look at the way his walking pattern was recorded by the CCTV camera. So again, this is very misleading, and now we have it on CCTV. We see the actor doing his shots multiple times, and we see the director telling him to do it again, and it looks pretty shady because they know what the real CCTV footage looks like, and then they purposely like put an action cam on his head to kind of make it look like, oh my god, I'm so drunk. Also, we are able to now compare the shoes. So there's been speculation that the real Mr. A's shoes were wet because the shoelaces looked heavy when they were swinging. And now the reenactment of the actor's shoes were, of course, dry shoelaces, and we can see a very clear difference between the way the shoes swing. So if you want to do a reenactment that way, they should have done that reenactment too. And so that also gives a clear indication that perhaps Mr. A maybe wasn't as wet in the drunk department, but was more wet in the physical department. Alright, so I wanted to respond to also some of your pressing viewer questions because there's been a lot of videos here, and so if you might not have seen every single video, there might have been some questions that we have answered, but that might have slipped through the cracks. And so let's just go over some of the pressing ones. And of course, alcohol played a big part in this case. And some people have been wondering, like, well, but if SJM was drunk, couldn't he have just, been drunk and that's why he died? And isn't that just a very, simple case of people get drunk and they die sometimes? It's an accident. Why is there such a big mystery around this? Well, the mystery is because had he been drunk and died on his own, we would have discovered his body right at the riverbank. So let's say he had fallen and he had even just drowned in 3 centimeters or 1 inch or 2 inches of water. We would have found him at the riverbank because that water it's not like the ocean where the level rises and then the current sweeps him out, because he was found after 5 days in the river. So the river, if you basically fall at the riverbank, you're gonna stay at the riverbank. You will not get washed out into the river. It's not that kind of a river. And also, even if you're even inside the water, you're not gonna go anywhere because the currents in the shallow part of the water are not that strong. So either he would have had to have walked into the water, or he would have had to have been dragged into the water. So that's what makes it a mystery, and that's what makes it suspicious. One side is trying to push, SJM must have just walked into the water on his own. That would make it the easiest, tidiest explanation. He was drunk and he walked into the water. And so there's no evidence of that except a very suspicious, questionable suggestion that somebody may have gone swimming into the river at 4:40 a.m. by the account of those fishermen. Nobody really believes them. Nobody really believes them. They can't even say if it was a man or a woman. They can't even really say the exact time, and nobody believes them. So that was the closest that they could get to some sort of evidence or an account of a possibility that SJM could have walked into the river on his own. If he did not physically walk himself into the river, that means that somebody else would have had to have placed him into the deeper part of the river. And as we are looking more and more into this case, it seems more and more likely that something like that could have been a possibility. So let's ask that question. Some of you have asked that question, but he could have walked into the river and then just drowned. Well, there's no bodily evidence that suggests that he walked, especially in a drunken state. First of all, you have to be super drunk in order to walk into the river when you hate swimming. First of all, you hate the water, and even if somebody loved swimming, they would not go into a river when it's super cold, early in the morning, and with their clothes on, unless you were super drunk. Okay, and if you were super drunk, you'd fall over and you'd scrape your body and you'd have all these marks. There were none of that on his body that would indicate that he was stumbling to go into the water. So let's say he was even totally sober and he decided to go into the water. There's no evidence on his socks that he had the right dirt that matched the type of dirt that was in the shallow regions of the river, only in the deeper part. So it seems as if that somebody had just taken him, dragged him, or floated him up on the river and then just like plunked him into the water. And so that's when his feet probably like touched the bottom and then kind of like sunk him in there. And that's where he was able to get the imprint of the deeper mud onto his socks. And remember, at that point, he did not have his shoes because his shoes were already off. We saw that in the smartphone video where he had just taken his shoes off while he was just on the picnic mat. So he didn't have his shoes already. Again, from that 331 video, it seems as if both boys had fallen over. Only one emerged at around 334, 335. We see no other evidence that SJM had come up after that. So it doesn't even seem as if SJM had been conscious enough to even be able to walk at that point. So it looks like he probably hit his head on the rocks, probably had some sort of unconscious coma, and then something happened. Something happened. What happened between 3:30 to 4:30? That should be the focus of the police investigation. So, speaking of the police investigation, a lot of you been asking like, well, isn't there this? Isn't there that? Isn't there CCTV footage of Mr. A exiting the taxi? Isn't there more CCTV footage from the bridge? Can't there be some forensics team at the police to analyze more of the phone or clear up the CCTV images? So that's the crux of the problem. It's an assumption that if there is a possibility and if it can be done, that it would be done. And that's why people are really upset, because it looks like it could be, but it's just not happening, because it's more of a there won't be. There won't be because the accusations is that there won't be because there's some sort of corruption or some sort of bribery or some sort of deal or some sort of cover-up, some sort of other obligation that is preventing something that could totally, yes, you're right, could happen, could be available, could be possible, could be provided. Yeah, not all of this is incompetence, but I guess the most polite thing is to say like, oh, I guess it's incompetence. Not everybody. Some people really do think it is incompetence, but other people I think are saying like, this is not right, because if something like this happens to us, who's to say that, wow, we'll be sold out to? SJM's father is really concerned about 3:30 to 4:30 like all the rest of us, and that really is probably the pivotal time period that has all of the answers. It is the time period where Mr. A claims that he was asleep, even though he claims the whole night he was blacked out, but that is really that's the sweet spot. I would say that's it. That has all the answers, and that's what we need. All right, guys, until next time, stay safe. Bye.
Tune in next time. Don't forget to subscribe. Find us on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Love you.